We fight today not just for ourselves, but for the generations coming after us. We will not bow down. We will not stay silent. We will stand and fight for true independence. It was the summer of 2025, when a moment at a Republican rally in Columbus, Ohio set off a global storm. Vice President JD Vance stepped on stage with the confidence of a man used to applause. But what he said next would cost him far more than he expected. Mocking African nations. Vance singled out Burkina Faso. With a smirk, he joked about countries that, in his words, talk about dignity and sovereignty, but can't even keep the lights on in their own capitals. The crowd laughed. I think he went further, mispronouncing Burkina Faso on purpose, turning a proud nation's name into a punchline. The clip spread across the internet in hours. Hashtags condemning Vance trended worldwide. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, the video landed on President Ibrahim Traoré's desk. His aide Massa Kabor immediately called him. Furious over the blatant disrespect. This wasn't the first time Traoré had seen his country mocked by a U.S. official, but this time felt different by the next morning. The anger had erupted across Africa. 31 African nations stood publicly with Burkina Faso. South Africa and Senegal called Vance's comments a colonial insult. American businesses in African markets suddenly faced a wave of uncertainty as investors pulled back amid the backlash. President Traoré knew the world was watching. He had a choice: issue the usual diplomatic statement or take a stand that would be remembered. He chose the latter. At 3 o'clock in the morning in Ouagadougou, a camera went live. The president appeared, dressed in a simple dark suit, the Burkina Faso flag behind him. His voice was steady, calm, and firm. "Hello, Mr. Vance," he began. "I saw your speech from Ohio. Thank you for the chance to educate you." What followed was not a speech filled with anger, but with facts. Traoré methodically laid out Burkina Faso's progress, new infrastructure, energy projects, and growing industries. He reminded the world that African nations were not powerless, nor would they tolerate disrespect. And for millions watching that live stream, one thing was clear: this was about more than a mispronounced name. It was about dignity, history, and the right of every nation to be respected. President Traoré's response was a masterclass in turning insult into strength. He didn't just defend Burkina Faso, he laid out the facts that spoke for themselves. In just 3 years, electricity access had increased by 400%. 94% of the country now had 4G internet coverage. Youth unemployment had dropped to 12%. And the economy was growing at over 8% all while new schools were opening across the country. Then he compared those numbers to Ohio, Vance's home state, where youth unemployment was rising and public schools were closing. "You couldn't even pronounce Burkina Faso," Mr. Vice President Traoré said with a quiet smile. "That's politely embarrassing." He closed with a reminder of the moment's significance. This message is streaming live from our own digital studio to 67 countries. Our technology made this possible. We are not behind, we are leading. The impact was instant. The video was played in classrooms at Harvard and the Kennedy School of Government, where professors called it a masterclass in 21st century diplomacy. In Ohio, protests erupted as students demanded that Vance admit he was wrong. The White House came under intense pressure. Vance's approval ratings collapsed. American media outlets were blunt. The New York Times called for a public apology, while the Wall Street Journal openly questioned his ability to serve as vice president. Across Africa, the response was one of unity and pride. 48 nations signed a joint letter demanding that Vance retract his comments. The African Union passed a resolution in support of Burkina Faso. Leaders from across the continent publicly praised President Traoré's calm but firm stand. By this point, the pressure on JD Vance was overwhelming. And so, in a packed press conference, he did something no one expected. He admitted he was wrong. My comments about Burkina Faso and President Traoré were inappropriate and disrespectful, Vance said. After reviewing the facts, I acknowledged that President Traoré was correct on every point. His knowledge of America's data was stronger than my knowledge of Africa's realities. That is unacceptable for a vice president. Then he went, further announcing he would travel to Burkina Faso to apologize in person. Days later, the world watched as Air Force Two touched down in Ouagadougou. Vance stepped off the plane, visibly nervous. But President Traoré greeted him with a handshake and a warm smile. "Welcome to Burkina Faso, Mr. Vice President. We admire your courage to come here," he said. It was a simple gesture, but it carried enormous weight. In that moment, humility and diplomacy won the day.